Okay, for starters, if you take a look at the browser window in my Final Cut window, you can see that basically everything I have is organized into various folders. The main reason for that is you want to be as organized as possible when you're editing your footage, especially when you go through your video clips. Now if you see here, I have a folder called Scenes, and for each scene I've actually labeled each clip according to the slate that they were given during production. So basically what this does is not only will I be more organized, but I'll be able to identify which are the best takes. And what's really great about Final Cut is you can actually color code your takes by just right clicking them, going to label, and you can see I have all these options here. So I'm going to click on Good Take. Now what makes this feature so powerful is that any take that you label as a good take, as best take, or whatever, will actually show up that exact color when you drop it into your timeline. So you can actually edit your whole movie, and just by staring at the timeline you'll be able to see exactly what takes you used, if they were the takes that you preferred, and it'll just help you keep, in general, more organized. Another tip that comes in handy would be backing up your sequences from time to time. And your sequence is basically your timeline right here that you edited in. You can make a bunch of them. You can make as many as you want, pretty much. So as you can see, I have a little sequence folder that I have divided into different cuts. So you can see I have my Final Cut preserved right at first. But as I'm editing, I usually have a bunch of rough cuts. And the reason why this comes in handy is because there'll be a lot of times when you're editing when you might try something new, or you might delete a take, and you could save it, or maybe you just didn't have enough undos stored on your computer. But you might always want to go back to another timeline or another edit that you had. So the best way to do that is to back up your timeline. So let's say I have my rough cut right here. This is rough 17. And let's say I knew I was going to experiment, or I just wanted to back it up. I can actually just right-click this sequence and click Duplicate. And it's going to take a second, and it just made me a new version. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rename it Cut 18. And if I double-click that, my new sequence is going to open up right here in the timeline. So I can actually close this old sequence and continue editing as usual. And then I'd always have Cut 17 to go back to. And this will really come in handy, especially if you're doing an assignment for a client, whether it be a wedding video or just a concert, and they're going to want you to change a lot of things, and they might not like the changes that they made, so they might just tell you, oh, you know what, I kind of liked it the way you did it originally, so just go back to the old edit. And you're going to like it a lot better when you have it backed up, and all you have to do is just go to your old sequence, rather than having to just sort of re-edit the whole thing by eye, pretty much. So that's just a handy tip. It saved me a lot of times. It's just always back up your sequences, and you'll be all set. Probably the most common mistake I've ever seen someone make when editing in any digital editing system is when they edit HD footage in a timeline that's standard definition. And the reason I see this happen so often is because Final Cut Pro, along with pretty much any leading editing software, by default their sequence settings are standard definition. And you can see that right now. I'm going to make a new sequence. I'm just going to make it in my others folder right now, and I'm going to call this Sequence Settings Test. I'm going to double click that. So it just created a new sequence, and you can already tell just right away by looking at it, this is a 4x3 sequence. So 90%, 99% of the time it's going to be standard definition. And if I click on the sequence, go to the little sequence window right here, and then go to Settings, which is also Apple 0. I'm going to click that, and you can see it's NTSC DV, which is the same thing as you were editing footage that you captured from a mini DV tape. So it's standard definition, definitely. So I'm going to go back to just my footage, and I'm just going to take a raw clip. So I'll use this. I'm going to drop it into the timeline, and you can see this handy message just came out. And what this is basically asking is, it's saying you have HD footage, but your sequence is standard definition. So it's saying, do you want your new timeline to match your clip settings? So I'm going to say yes. And right away you can just see it reformatted this whole timeline to an HD timeline. And just to double check that, I'm going to go back to my sequence settings. And you can already see it's an HD timeline. So I can actually edit right away. It's actually all set. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what happens when you actually edit your timeline or your sequence in the wrong settings. And it's going to show you what to look for to make sure that doesn't happen. So I'm going to double click one of my clips, and I'm going to go to Edit, Item Properties, Format, which is also Apple 9 as a keyboard shortcut. I'm going to click on Format, and you can see right here that this clip, it's an HD clip. It's 960 by 720, so they shot it in 720, and it's shot on DVC Pro HD, which is what the HVX shoots on. So you can tell that it's HD. So now if I go to my sequence settings, and once again I'm going to create a new sequence, and I'm going to just call this wrong settings. I'm going to double click that. So you can see once again sequence, settings, standard definition sequence. So if I'm going to drop my clip into this sequence, I'm going to click no this time, and you can see it didn't reformat everything. It's still 4:3. Now if I were to play this full screen, I'm going to go to View, External Video, All Frames, and you can see my image here is now window boxed. So it's a standard definition output that's been blocked off to match the actual framing. So I'm going to hit escape to just get out of here. So now the clip is actually being compressed to an SD image, and you can see it's actually not even rendered. So I'll be able to play this back fine, but the problem is now everything that I'm editing will be done in standard definition. So that's going to give you a lot of problems down the road. You really want to make sure that it doesn't happen. It's going to take you a lot longer to fix your settings again after you edit it rather than before you edit. So once again, just make sure that you're always editing in the proper settings to your clips.